to, I'm looking forward. I'm sorry I missed you last week. You had competition.
Hey, competition is good, all right? And I don't know what's going on tonight, so we'll see how many people show up. It's supposed to be close to about a little over 30 people. I know that a couple of people aren't coming because they're not well. They're a little under the weather. So.
I brought my copy.
Of course, Willie. Gotta go, Willie. All right, okay. The Holy Scriptures, all right? Not the Tanakh, the Holy Scriptures, all right. I hope everyone had a good week.
Yeah. Oh, it was lovely.
Yes, thank you. I actually got my copy from the library. I still have it. So
Okay.
maybe if somebody needs a copy, maybe they can call the Newton Library and see if they have additional copies.
So that's a copy you borrowed from the library, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, all right.
Oh, my copy's still not even in transit. I gave up. Put it on the Kindle.
Oh, you got it on Kindle?
Yeah,
That's smart.
No,
it was
Got
fun.
mine
It was
in 2
great to
days.
read.
They're
I
different.
like a hard copy, kind of a dinosaur, right? All right.
I agree with you, Steve. I much prefer it, but Kindle could come in, 30 seconds.
I'm watching now, before we get started, so I think we're going to begin. And as people come in, we'll admit them. I'm going to ask everybody, if you would please, to stay muted. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to do now, just as a test, I'm going to mute all. And okay, and it says here to allow participants to unmute themselves. Yes, but I want to know if everybody, I'm just going to I want to do this one thing about unmuting everyone. I want to see if there's anybody here. That's interesting. Okay, so I cannot unmute people.
Bubby, are we Bubby? Or Bubby
Yeah.
5?
Either one, I think.
That's interesting.
Password.
Can Samantha do it? Samantha is the host.
Jared
So
Aaron.
you might have to do it on your own then, okay? It depends upon the version of Zoom that you have, which is fine. So at least we know that. So from time to time, I'll ask a question. And I would like, but sometimes there'll be 2 ways we're going to do this. Either I'll ask a question that I'd like a response in terms of among all of us. And that way you just raise your hand or unmute, raise your hand and unmute, and I'll recognize you. The other way would be also to do it through the chat. And that would be to submit questions. And you can submit them. Sam is going to be our Temple Emmanuel tech person who's going to be working with us tonight. So you can either submit it to her, a question, or you can submit it to everyone. But whatever way, what works the best way, Sam? Which was going to work easiest for you? What's the best?
Either one.
Either one. Okay. And she will take those questions and we'll try to organize them, and I'll try to answer them as best I can. So with that said, are we ready to begin? Yes? Okay. All right. So let me just summarize what we did last week, especially for some of the people who are not here last week. I gave an introduction and basically looking at kind of like the world that created the Bible, in a sense, that where does it all begin, in terms of like giving the historical background and looking at different themes, functions of the priests, and how it basically changed over hundreds and hundreds of years, and just looking at the moral, the literary, and the theological ways in which the Bible was written. And then in the first chapter, I went over to looked at basically the geography and the political and the religious evolution of what the Middle East or the Near East, the world of the Bible at that time, what it looked like. And then we get into chapter 2, looking at the first two authors of, and actually the first three authors. 2 are really discussed a little bit more in detail, and we will continue to do that. And that is we compared looking at the 2 versions of the book of the creation story. And what I want to do now, and did everybody receive the email that I sent out to you today? Yes? I sent out the email. If everybody just could unmute, because I can't see everybody at one time. So,
Yes.
yes, everybody received it. Okay.
Got it.
So I would like to turn
I don't
to,
have it.
I would like to turn to the version, the Noah story, the flood story, which begins on page 39. For those of you that have the book, you can use the book, page 39. And I think, Sam, you're going to be able to put that up so people can see it. Okay. Is that clear to people? I know it's a little, okay, all right. But what happens is once we switch we try to do different sizes, and there's no happy medium here. So I guess you can scroll. Is that what you can do, Sam? Is that how we'll do it? Yeah. Okay. All right. So would someone like to start reading? Because this is going to take a little bit of time, but I think it's really important just to give us a sense of this. All right. So it says here that the flood story, and Friedman, as did other previous biblical scholars, look at this, and they say that there is the priestly text, which is going to be, this is even J and E, but we say the priestly text because in terms of some of the way that how it's structured. So the priestly text is in boldface capitals, and the J text is in regular type. So would anyone like to begin reading? And it's hard when we're sharing the screen, it's hard. So why don't I pick someone? Louis Schneider, would you like to read out loud? Do you have the copy of the book, right?
Yes, I have a copy of the book. I also note that one edition of the book is a different page system.
Ah, because
My
you,
page is
which version do you
54
have?
in this paperback, page 54.
Really?
Yes.
All right. This one I did not know. Okay. Well, then what we're going to do is, you see what's posted on screen?
Oh, yeah.
All right. If everybody sees that, let's use that text. Is it big enough for everybody to read?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So Louis, you want to start reading?
Okay, wait a minute. These pictures are I've got to put the pictures in a different place so I can get the text. There we go. Okay. All right. And Yahweh saw the evil of humans was great in the earth, and all the inclination of the thoughts of their heart was only evil all the day. And Yahweh regretted that he had made humans in the earth, and he was grieved to his heart. And Yahweh said, I shall wipe out the humans which I have created from the face of the earth, from human to beast, to creeping thing to bird of the heavens, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in Yahweh's eyes.
Okay. All right. Who would like to continue reading? All right.
I'll be happy to.
Please.
Okay. Where are we here? These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. And Noah served 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the earth was corrupted before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and here it was corrupted, for all flesh had corrupted its way on the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. And here I am going to destroy them with the earth.
Okay.
Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms with the ark, and pitch it outside and inside with pitch. All right?
Okay. All right. So just from this, just of this beginning, you can see that, what are the differences between the two? And anybody can do it. Rebecca?
Right.
No, I'm just trying to find it. It's not on page 39 in my book.
54.
I did not anticipate this. Okay. Is this true with everybody?
No,
I'm 39.
I don't have it on 39.
I have 54.
What is it?
Page
54.
54 in the paperback, 5-4.
54.
Really? Wow. Okay. All right.
All right.
I gotta look into this. Thank you for bringing this up to me. All right, so maybe I think the best thing would be for me to read, okay, and then we can look at it, just so it's because I also don't have access to all of the pictures, the frames of people while we have this up here. All right, so at the beginning now, we see here that it's, so this is God, you know, he sees that there's evil of humans was greater than the earth. All right. And what does he want to do? He wants to destroy them. And he regrets that he made them. So, you know, what you're seeing here a little bit is that God regrets, Yahweh regrets. This is, but he also, but he's angry and he's going to do this and regrets. So we see a couple, there was a little bit of like this idea of the fact is that he regrets. That means that he second guesses himself, which is kind of interesting, all right? And that's why that's that way there. And so you could see that he's like, and we said that Yahweh is a little more compassionate, and Yahweh has more of there's a little more anthropomorphic characteristics that are associated with Yahweh. Whereas with Elohim, which is also the priestly, because both the priestly comes out of the Elohim, this is more judgmental. This is more king-like. This is more ruler-like. You know, that this is my way or the highway type of thing. Okay. And we can see that going on. All right. So I'm going to just continue to read because I think it's easier to do it that way. And Sam, I think, would you be able to scroll up and down with that, or is that possible?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And so there he says, and God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has become before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them, and here I am going to destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms with the ark, and pitch it outside and inside with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. 300 cubits the length of the ark, 50 cubits its width, and 30 cubits its height. You shall make a window for the ark, and so forth and so forth, this detail. But you see, because the detail, that's part of the how it is. That what's the difference though? But focusing on the fact that begins, God says at the beginning here, or in the beginning here, in the Yahweh and the J type, this is the Yahweh said, "I will wipe out the humans." But he starts up by saying he saw that all evil was good. In the E1 or the P1, what do we see here? He starts out by talking about Noah, and only in the middle there he says, the end of all flesh has become before me, for the earth is filled
Like
with violence
13?
because of them.
Right here.
Does everyone
13.
see that?
Yes.
Okay. So already, so he kind of like, he throws it in there, right there like that. And then he goes on to say, and he said, you shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from the top, and you shall make an entrance to the ark in its side. You shall make lower, second, and third stories for it. Very, very detailed. Okay. And here I am bringing the flood, water over the earth to destroy all flesh, in which the breath of life from under the heavens, everything which is on the land will die. And it continues to go on. And then finally, just going down to line 22 at the very end of that bold print there. And Noah did according to all that God commanded him, so he did. And then you get into chapter 7, where now we get into the J type, and he says, and Yahweh said to Noah, come, you and all your household to the ark, for I have seen you as a righteous before me in this generation. Of all the clean beasts, take yourself 7 pairs, man and his woman, and of the beasts which are not clean, 2, man and his woman. Also of the birds of the heavens, 7 pairs, male and female, to keep alive seed on the face of the earth. For in 7 more days I shall reign on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and I shall wipe out all the substance that I have made from upon the face of the earth. And Noah did according to all that Yahweh had commanded him. And so you can see they're similar, but they're distinct. And that this was really important to understand that. I'm not going to read the whole story. That I'm going to leave up to you. But I think you have enough of a flavor here to understand that there were 2 different versions that were very brilliantly put together. All right. They were just like literally edited, and they were just beautifully, seamlessly put together. All right. So, and the other one I wanted to talk about was the story of Esau and Jacob. And I think I mentioned this last week a little bit, but the story of Esau and Jacob, the twins, I think this is important because on pages, well, I don't know what page you have it on in your book. I have it on pages 51 through 53. But the whole purpose of the story of Jacob and Esau, because Jacob becomes the 12 tribes and Esau becomes the kingdom of Edom. And the relationship between the southern kingdom of Judah later on in its history, once they become divided, is really important because Judah is located right near Edom. And Sam, if you could put up the map of Judah, Israel and Judah. And I also sent these to you. And I know that Terry did as well. So everybody should have multiple copies of it. So if you look at this, you can see where Judah is located in the south. And also Edom is located south of that. When you take a, thank you very much. That's great. By the way, can I do that as well? Oh, I can. Is everyone seeing my arrow or is just Sam's arrow? A lot of this technology is I'm still getting used to it. All right. And just this gives you a whole sense of the layout of the land. Okay. Moab, and you have here on the eastern side, essentially, which is really an Ammon, which is all part of Jordan. In the northern kingdom of Israel, you have Megiddo, you have Dan, which is located in the very north, the Sea of Galilee, Shechem, and Shiloh, or Shiloh, but Shiloh is actually the pronunciation, Bethel, Jerusalem or Jerusalem, Lachish, and Hebron. These are like the major players in terms of the cities and what they, in terms of what we'll be discussing tonight and in future classes. All right. Okay, so this gives you a sense here in terms of like that. And that's why Jacob and Esau are really important. And because all of even what God tells Rebecca, that the younger one shall serve the older one. And then of course, then she plots, to have Jacob receive the birthright, not the birthright, but the blessing, Isaac's blessing before he dies, and how he gives the blessing to Jacob, who tricks him by seeming to be Esau, and then later on Esau is just so distraught, and and he gets so angry, and he really wants to kill his brother. He really wants to, and the relationship that they have, and then eventually down the road, Edom also takes on the importance because Edom is the color of red, and even though Esau was a redhead, was red hair. But Edom also takes on even greater importance symbolically, that down the road, Edom will become the symbol for Rome. All right, when the destruction of the Second Temple and the destruction of Jerusalem and the second major exile of the Jews from Israel. Okay, and so, all right, so now we're going to go into chapter 3, and in chapter 3, he talks about 2 kingdoms, 2 writers. So if you see the process of the book, he starts off with the world that it was built. He gives you some examples of these 2 writers, but now what he wants to do is he wants you to be able to understand these 2 kingdoms of Israel and Judah and what was taking place in both of them. All right, according to Friedman and others as well, And that is that E, who is the the author, not only favors Israel, but he also says that E is from Israel. And he does this, he proves this by saying that, and he not only that, but he said it's probably from the city of Shiloh. And we saw on the map there that Shiloh was located north of Jerusalem, but in the southern part of the northern kingdom of Israel. And he basically does this, and Friedman, and how he says that he can prove this by looking at the analysis of the Ten Commandments story. In the version that he writes, Aaron plays a significant role. He builds a golden calf and encourages the people to celebrate wildly while Moses receives the tablets from God. God wants to destroy the people because they worship a rival god, the golden calf. But Moses pleads for mercy, and God grants it. And it's kind of interesting now that God has given these commandments. And the first one is, that I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You shall have no other gods before you. Second commandment is that you shall not make any molten gods, or you shall not have any idols, graven images. But again, that would be the E part. But also you see that in terms of there's a little bit of J there because God grants Moses' request to plead, when he pleads for mercy. But Moses, when he returns and comes down the mountain, he sees actually what the people have done, that he smashes the stone tablets, and that Aaron and the Levites, they kill everyone. Now, what's at play here? Well, the primary role of Aaron indicates that the hero status that he has among the Israelites, while the golden calf image parallels the golden calves of the northern religion. So there's a lot going on here. And by the way, if you're not sure if I'm moving too fast or if something's not clear, please feel free. And this is because I'm actually limited. You know what, Sam, I think what I'd like to do is to change can we change the screen so I can have, I want to be able to just go to gallery view. That's much better. Okay. All right. So if I'm moving too fast, please raise your hand or unmute yourself and say, could you just go a little slower? So is everybody with me so far?
Mhm.
Okay, great. All right, good. But the smashing of the stone tablets, that symbolically, if you're looking at the authors, because it's written by E, it's basically saying that these tablets, they don't exist. If they're broken, then they don't exist. Because they were supposedly put in the ark and then brought to Jerusalem eventually, along with the actual full set of the second set that Moses later is actually is told to write it down. So therefore, it's the idea of the fact is that because of the calves, which is discrediting the northern kingdom, where the calves were were the idols that were used in the northern kingdom. And it also discredits the southern kingdom because these tablets are fractured. So they just don't have any meaning, or they may not even exist. All right. But the use of the golden calf image, as I said, discredits the north. And Friedman proposes that the author is one of the disenfranchised Levite priests who really want to recover their power base. And when we say that the Levite priests, in terms of who were disenfranchised, this is basically from the times when when sacrifices were not really centralized, that they could actually have sacrifices in local areas to make it expedient for the people, so they wouldn't have to schlep long distances. Once the Ten Commandments and the Torah was given to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, and then it was actually taught to them over a period of time, we know that the people are commanded on the three holidays, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, to actually come to Jerusalem, and where they bring their sacrifices, and that's where the sacrifices take place. And so for them to do this, this was, and that's why we call the holidays the Shalosh Regalim, the 3 pilgrimage festivals, 3 Shalosh Regalim, lakes or walking. All right. Okay. Now, so I said the E author's commandment about making statues cast out on both the northern calves, which are made of cast gold, and the southern cherubs made of olive wood, but plated with gold. On the other hand, the J author's similar commandment is not to make molten statues, which bans the north's calves, but doesn't affect the cherubs because they're actually made out of wood. Yeah, they have gold plate, but it's still made out of wood. So it's not the same. We see in Numbers that J elevates the ark to a high importance, but he does not mention it, but E doesn't mention it. Whereas instead, E writes about the tabernacle or the tent of meeting, while J does not bring it up. These are minute, these are important things, and you really have to pore over these things. This is not like reading, the stock pages. This is on a daily basis. This is, you really need to pay attention to what really is going on here, and to see the language where it shows up in different places throughout, not just the 5 books of Moses, but actually in the later books too, and which we will be getting into. Okay. Now, J uses the name Yahweh. Now, Yahweh is, by the way, if you read the commentary very often in Chumash Eitz Chaim, or in the old Hertz Chumash, or any other Chumash, the letters that they use in Hebrew is the Yud He Vav He. Yud He Vav He. In English, what we say is YHWH, because Yud He Vav He, YHWH. And that's where we got the Yahweh. But there are many people who don't even accept Yahweh because we really don't know how it's pronounced. As a matter of fact, it was pronounced at one time in the temple, in the daily service and the sacrifices when they had the service, because there would be prayers that would be recited by the Levites, because that was one of their major functions, was to do that. But eventually they stopped using it because they felt that it only should be used in specific circumstances and not on a regular basis, that it was too special. And this is what we call the tetragrammaton, the 4-letter name. So we really don't know how to pronounce it. And they decided at that particular point that they were going to essentially just use Adonai, Lord, and how they differentiated. And that's basically what they did. Even though in the Torah, it is written as Yud He Vav He, we pronounce it Adonai. There is another instance where we have Yud He Vav He. When you see, when it says Adonai, the same letter, Yud He Vav He in sequence, unless it is what we call the El Rachum, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, all right, which is the whole idea, the 13 attributes of God, which we read on fast days, and also in the Torah portion, Ki Tisa. But we also have that, it also can be seen Adonai Elohim. We're not sure why Yud He Vav He is Elohim sometimes, but because they follow each other and because they're not in like the 13 attributes in a specific setting, that they are always referred to as Adonai Elohim. Okay. And that, for all we know, that may have been a literary device that was used by scribes, by the Sofrim, in ancient times. I'm not sure, and I won't profess to know. And I haven't really seen a reason why it is that way. It's just used that way in some instances, not regularly. Usually Elohim is spelled Elohim.
Question.
Yes.
Steve, my question is, Elohim is obviously plural. And so we have the 2 concepts of God. One is singular and one is plural. One is associated with the north and one is associated with the south. Why do you think that the north chose the plural form?
Oh, I don't think that, well, that's, there are a number of different reasons for that. I don't think necessarily the North shows it. I think that was just the author E sees that there are two specific aspects of Elohim, that there's the regal and also the ones who are like the angels and the ones and the cherubs, the ones, these lesser I don't want to call them gods, but help me out here. I'm having a senior moment. Celestial. These celestial beings or images that God kind of like sees things that is, yes, God is God and is the creator, but there's always this partnership. Remember when God says to Adam, says that there will be a partner, you will be my partner in doing this. And he also wanted to find a partner for Adam. So there is this certain quality about that. All right. So and there are a number of different characteristics. I don't necessarily want to focus on that, but it's a great question. Actually, you might find some good answers. Actually, I think that in the Chumash Eitz Chaim, that they might give you some explanation about that in the earlier chapters.
Is it possible because the northern kingdoms, the northern tribes were more close to Baal, and the whole Baal cult was up there in the north and maybe had influenced them?
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
And in
It's a good question.
the Elenu, we bring it back together. Ki Adonai hu Elohim.
I understand.
So how can Adonai hu Elohim? They bring it back together in the.
Well, God is so powerful that God has multiple personality, multiple aspects of that personality. So let's just kind of like leave it at that for now. Okay.
Okay.
All right. All right. So Jay uses the name Yahweh consistently, but he also uses El until Moses asked God's name, which turns out to be Yahweh also. Now it's really interesting in Genesis, in Bereshit, in Shmot, when Moses is, he's chasing that sheep that has run away, and he comes close to this area, and God says, "Stop." This voice says to him, "Stop." He says, "Okay, take off your sandals. This is holy ground. Come." And when he has this whole thing, God tells him who he is and what he's going to do. And he said, "Well, what should I, when I go to Egypt and I go to Pharaoh and even the people, they're going to say, well, what's his name?" Because obviously every God had a name, right? Made sense. But God answers him, he answers him in the following way. Eheyeh, Asher, Eheyeh.
I am what I am. I will be what I
It's
will.
traditionally translated as, if everybody could mute, that would be great. It's translated as, traditionally, I am that I am. But the Hebrew doesn't say that. Eheyeh, Asher, Eheyeh. I will be that what I will be. In other words, I'll be whatever I want to be. And it depends upon the situation. You're never really going to know my name, and you're never going to know what's going to happen and how I'm going to react and these types of things. I mean, I'm expanding a little bit more, but when it says, Eheyeh, Asher, Eheyeh, that's it. All right. It's not Mo, it's not Larry, it's not Curly, it's not Moshe, it's not Dovey, it's not none of those. It's that I am, or I am what I will be. And so, and they go, and Moses, he does it, even after rebelling all this time, by the way. Okay, you should know that because Moses argued with God and didn't really want to go, that Moses gave the whole position of Kohen Gadol, the high priest, to Aaron. He was going to give it to Moses because that was going to be like, the ultimate position. Instead, he gives it to Aaron. And he makes Moses, he gives him a lot of chores along the way for 40 years, and a lot of headaches to deal with the Jewish people. All right. So, and he also, and Friedman then takes this as more evidence that the author is a Levite priest who lives in Israel. Why? Because he hypothesizes that the Levites might have been the only tribe to have been enslaved in Egypt. This is a very interesting thing. He says that basically that, we have this whole story of Jacob and his, ultimately that Joseph is sold by his brothers into slavery. He ends up in Egypt and he becomes an interpreter of dreams, and he interprets, Pharaoh's dream, and all of a sudden we all know the story. But he's saying, but according to some authorities, and even Friedman might suggest that only the Levites went down. Only the Levites went down to Egypt on the first shot. And then when Jacob comes down, and that they lived in this near the palace, and that later on Jacob and his family went down and lived in Goshen. But that there were always people who left back in Canaan, in that land where they were living. But he acknowledges that this is still just a hypothesis. But as for Jay, that author favors Judah and does all he can to avoid the covenant between Moses and God, while emphasizing the early covenant between Abraham and God. So there were all these different covenants between Abraham and God, between Moses and God, later on between Moses and God, later on towards the end of the 40 years in the desert. Later on, we're going to see the covenant between David, King David, and God. All right. Okay. All right. So now, are we clear at this particular point and what he's doing? So he said, despite the differences, both J and E have enough similarities that separating them on stylistic grounds fails. And Friedman believes that various explanations for this. He said the two authors may have been writing from an earlier document, just placing the people and events into molds that favor either Judah or Israel. Well, when you think about historians, we talk about revisionist history, right? And people are doing it. People looking at, you can look at the American Revolution and you could see it from traditional sources, and then you could look at it today from people who are writing today who have access maybe to other sources, and they just give this different spin. And you can buy it or you don't have to buy it. But in some respects, it's very much like this. He says, or the two authors may have been consciously imitating the language and style of stories common to both kingdoms. And it may have been a style of writing anyway. People that might have been doing that is a thing that, or that maybe one person is basing his version on the other one. But Friedman ultimately, he rejects the idea that the versions have been written by groups rather than two individuals. There are schools of biblical critique that really try to say that, it can't be a person, maybe it's schools, but even if it's a school, they're not all going to write the exact same way. They're going to write, the individual is still going to try to inflict or, impose his or her personal style. There's something about it, and you can always tell the differences. So this clearly and I certainly agree that it's two people, it's just a person that's writing this, or two people writing their own thing, E and J. He also suggests that maybe that the J author might be a female, which is kind of interesting. I'm not so sure about that, and not that I have any problem with it, but I'm just saying I don't think he really proved it. He used the example of Tamar in Genesis chapter 38. Basically that, in that story, Tamar's husband Judah treats her wrongly and she finally wins an apology from him. So the fact that she was strong, that she could do that, okay, maybe he was an understanding guy. After all, ultimately the kingdom was known as the Southern Kingdom, ultimately became known as Judah. And he's the fourth oldest son, and he's the one after which that Southern Kingdom was named. So finally, we just finished this up here, this particular section that Friedman puts the dates of writing of J between 848 and 722 BCE, and E from 922 to 722 BCE. As to why the two versions were combined, Friedman uses the argument regarding the respect for ancient texts and the social need for familiar stories to be retained. So there's a certain tradition, and they don't want to offend one another because, you know, the old story, how come you're not using my thing? And how, you know, it's like two children in a sense fighting over something like this. Why? And the parent will try to come up with some kind of a compromise. And I think a lot of this was, but it was a brilliantly edited compromise. Okay. So what was the world that produced the Bible from 722 to 587? This is, you know, after the fall of the Northern Kingdom in 722 to the Assyrians, Judah remains as a greatly weakened country and a subject to more powerful empires. Those empires were essentially Egypt, Babylonia, and Assyria, and they all come and play. So could you put up, Sam, the map of the ancient Near East? Okay, so if we take a look at the map and can you see my arrow or see him? All right, I don't know. All right, this is fine. So we take a look at, so here's Israel. Can everyone see this when I'm pointing? Is that yes, no? No, they can't. Okay.
Just me, but I can point.
You can do it. Okay. So Israel, and you see, look at they're surrounded. Nothing's changed. It's the same. Maybe the names of the players have been changed a little bit today, but there's you can see the surrounding. So you have Egypt to the southwest, and you've got Babylonia and Assyria to the east. Babylonia directly east of Israel, and Assyria northeast of Israel. And it's interesting that we will see that. So they're really caught in the crosshairs. But we also see that Israel really is like the center of the crossroads of the caravan routes, the trade routes, and also military routes. So it really was a, you know, I mean, it was a player in many respects, whether they wanted to have it that way or not. But this is, if you take a look at this map, and you can see that. You have the Phoenicians to the north, you have the Edomites and the Moabites and the Ammonites. There, Aram is really Syria, okay? Because you remember that we talk about in the Haggadah and also the story of Jacob when he goes to his family, his mother's family. He goes to Laban, who is the Aramite, all right? He's Arami. He's from Syria, okay? So you get to see this picture. So try to keep this because, well, I don't want to keep this up all the time, but envision the fact that Israel, that now it's a weakened Judah. So what we have here, even though this says Israel, but keep in mind that the northern kingdom no longer exists and that the southern kingdom is actually have been weakened by the very fact that Israel doesn't exist. That was, in some respects, the northern kingdom was a little bit of a protection for the southern kingdom. But this is not happening now. Okay, that's gone. So Judah stands as a gateway, like I said, into Egypt and on a desirable trade route. It's like the crossroads for the caravans and everything. Being under the dominion of other cultures with their own gods, the Judean king, whoever that might be at any particular time, by necessity, required the priest to honor these foreign gods. But the priests highly resented such a move, and essentially they protested constantly. They did not want idols put into the high places, the different places throughout, and specifically in Shiloh, and so that was really important to them. They didn't want this, and they didn't want to have idols in Judah in the temple. This was just not what they were bargaining for. Politically, this works out to keep the empires such as the Assyrians and the Babylonians from simply crushing Judah and making the area its own territory. Now, you should understand that what's taking place in this particular period is that that Assyria, after essentially the destruction of the northern kingdom and the exile of the people to to Assyria, although there are those also who left it, did not go to Assyria, but they went other places, but we don't know where they went. And these are the 10 lost tribes. They refer to them as the 10 lost tribes of Israel, of the northern kingdom of Israel. We're not really sure where they went. There's a lot of different hypotheses, but I'm not going to speculate on those now because that's not really the point. But because Assyria, after this particular point, Assyria's strength started to dwindle. And as it was really becoming weaker and weaker and weaker, they formed an alliance with Egypt. And this was really important because while Assyria was becoming weaker, Babylonia was becoming stronger. And the kings of Judah, they were looking at this and they were seeing the situation, and they really were going to they're going to do whatever they needed to do in order to survive. So essentially they became vassals of these different states at any given time. But certainly as Babylonia started to really become more powerful, then Israel or Judah started to really basically stake its claim with Babylonia. Okay, and we'll see how this plays out. All right. Okay, but like I said, from a religious standpoint, the priests and the prophets condemned the king as going against Yahweh's wishes. And an additional major change was basically what happened as a result of all of this, that the tribal leaders, essentially they disappeared, as did the tribes themselves. They were no longer distinguishable. All right. You remember the map that I showed you last week about all of the 12 tribes of Israel? They're gone, essentially. And the only thing that remains now is that their identification, just in terms of with the names of the tribes, maybe the leaders of the tribes, but they no longer had these claims to these various areas. All right, which by the way, we could actually look at in terms of modern times, post 1967, after the 67 war, what happened? We had so many people coming, specifically American Orthodox religious Jews from the United States came to Israel. And where did they want to settle? In what we call the territories. But if you look at it on the map of Israel, in ancient Israel, that's basically what that was, okay? That area there we call the West Bank is really Ammon, Moab, Edom, that whole section there, okay? All right, now, King Hezekiah, who ruled Judah from 715 to 687, he initiates reforms, religious reforms, by cleansing the temple of the idols, designating the temple in Jerusalem as the central place. This is crucial because what this really does is that it displaces, and also it's now saying if this is where everything has to take place, here in Jerusalem, you have to bring your animals, your grains, your vegetables, anything that you bring for a sacrifice, they all must come to Jerusalem at all times. Because at the very same time, what he did is that he got rid of the high places. And I referred to those high places before. And those are where local sacrificial altars were in the various local communities away from Jerusalem, north, south, east, west. And basically said, and those were run by Levite priests, but they were the local ones. They were the rural Levites. Well, now their position was totally gone. And essentially, Jerusalem now was going to be the priests in Jerusalem, the Levites in Jerusalem. This was also a power. This also was beneficial to them too, obviously for political reasons, not just for religious reasons. Okay. There was also a reference that was made there. If you remember the reference about Moses's snake, that was that he had made this snake, whether he made it or he had it crafted, a sculpture, and that probably goes back to when Moses was in Egypt. And remember the first thing that he did, because the Egyptian magicians, they threw down their staffs, and what came out? Do you remember? Snakes. And then Moses did the same thing with his staff, the one that and that turned into a snake. So some people talk about that maybe that had some kind of magical qualities, whatever. But anyways, but supposedly he had it built, or he had the sculpture made, and that played an importance in solving the puzzle of who wrote the Bible. And according to one of the part of the Bible in 2 Kings, that Hezekiah destroyed that sculpture because he said this was like, because the reason why is because they were burning incense in a part of like seeing it as some kind of a mystical or almost like an idol. And any little thing, no matter what it was, he just wanted to expunge that from all of Israel or from all of Judah. This rebellion against the Assyrian kings, this brings a fierce military action against the Judean city of Lachish. And do you remember where Lachish is located? In the southwestern part in the map of the country of Israel as we know Israel, but it's located in the northwestern part of Judah. But that becomes important. Modern archaeological excavations at that site and also at Nineveh, which was the capital of Assyria, confirm the biblical accounts. But the story of Judah from Nineveh never claims that the Assyrians take Jerusalem. And that gets to be a whole thing. There were different versions. One version, if you look at the biblical accounts, that Assyria never really takes, Sennacherib never really takes control of Jerusalem. He destroys the outer cities, all of the major cities that are the walled off cities, that he does, but he never takes Jerusalem. Whereas in the Assyrian account, which is known as the Prism inscription, that basically says that he did in fact do that. There was not only just a siege of Jerusalem, but also that that they were able to capture it and to take some of the booties from there. So now we get into following King Hezekiah, his first son and then his grandson, after Hezekiah is killed, his first son, his son and his grandson, which were known as Manasseh and Ammon, they go back to essentially the following the ways of the Assyrian religions. They bring idols back to the temple. Jerusalem no longer serves as the center of religion. The high places get the rural Levite priests, they get their jobs back and they're happy. And essentially they, so because sacrificing can be done locally, it's a great convenience as far as they're concerned. They're happy. They're going back to their old ways. So what happens then? What follows? And that is, we come up with King Josiah. And Josiah was Hezekiah's great-grandson. And we're going to get into in terms of like the court of the next chapter there relating to the court of King Josiah. But Josiah is really significant. He is, and for all intents and purposes, for his age, and for the short period of time that he ruled, he had a profound impact. And some of the biblical references that describe him were very similar to what other character? You remember? Someone raised their hand. I see Phyllis Eben, you're shaking your head. Do you want to unmute and you can?
Is it Moses?
Yes, Moses. And we're going to see some real similarities between Moses and Josiah. And it is he was significant in terms of what he did and the impact that he had. So why does he do all of this? Why does he go back to these reforms that Hezekiah did? He does this because a priest discovers a scroll of the Torah, and upon reading it, Josiah becomes very distraught, and thus the reforms, they begin again, more of them. The first thing he actually does is to destroy the high places. And he really actually almost repents. he says, I can't believe this. Where has this been? And what is this book? So, and meanwhile, around the same time, Assyria's strength is really starting to weaken, and Babylon is now becoming the major power in the area. And then Egypt, as I said before, becomes an ally of Assyria. And the Egyptian troops are now passing through Judah on their way to help Assyria fight Babylonia. Josiah, who's now basically kind of like taken the Babylonian side, he understands where his bread is buttered, and he's going to make sure that he stays with him. He goes out to meet the Egyptian army at Megiddo, and essentially what happens to him is that he is killed. He's killed by an arrow that pierces his heart, and he's 40 years old. He's very young. He took the throne when he was 8 years old. We're not sure who really was his regent until he was old enough. But by the time he was 18, which is in 622 BCE, this is when Hilkiah, the priest, finds this book, or the scroll of the Torah, and then everything stems from that. And then we're going to get into that. So the book that the priest Hilkiah said he found in the temple in 622 was Deuteronomy. All right. So, and it says, I'm not even going to quote pages anymore because it's not worth it. I don't know what page you have it in the different versions. We know what the old expression, you got two Jews, you got three opinions. So now we got all these Jews here and you all have different versions of the book. Thanks a lot. Make my job easier. I love it. Okay. I'll deal with it. All right. Now, so anyway, the above quote that, as I said, quoting from the book, says the book that the priest Hilkiah said he found in the temple in 622 BC was Deuteronomy. That quote summarizes the overarching question about Deuteronomy. The traditional claim that Moses had written it comes into question when considering the political forces at work during the reign of King Josiah. Making Jerusalem once again the center of religion and lending credence to the sack by discovering a lost book of the Torah worked neatly into the desires of the priests in Jerusalem. So you need to understand what was going on, when were these things written, what was taking place, and how did this affect what was written and how it was introduced and how did it become part of what we know as the Tanakh, all right, specifically the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, the Torah. And that's why it's fascinating to study this, because I think that's important. And also, I think anytime you study history, you need to understand what was taking place at that time that they're making references to another period in history. I think it's really important because it gives us some context and some understanding of the motivation of the authors when they write these things. And also that the share of the sacrifices that the priests received was 10%, a tithe, but they received 10% of everything that came into them because they didn't work. That was their job. Their job was to perform the sacrifices. Their job was to take care of the temple, or in the desert in the tabernacle. So these things were brought to them and they took 10% of it, and the rest of it was given to the people because that's how it was. It was fine, but 10% went to them. Can you imagine that every sacrifice that was brought, they got 10%? For them, it was a holiday every day. They were just eating and eating and eating and eating. But all kidding aside, but think of the number of sacrifices they were performing and how long it took. It wasn't an easy thing to do. It really, I think not only just physically, but I think psychologically and emotionally, I think it was very taxing on them. So to all this food, who knows, obviously what they did with it. Clearly they couldn't consume all of it, but quite frankly, that again, that's not necessarily part of what we're looking to discuss, but I think it's always fascinating sometimes to look at these sidelines. What do they do with 10%? Okay. A German investigator, W.M.L. DeWitt, DeVette, early in the 19th century. So he asserted that Moses did not write Deuteronomy, and that the book had been written specifically to support Josiah's reformation. And he calls this a pious fraud. And that's a huge accusation. All right, because nobody up until that time really was indicating that. They talked about different authors already, that there was J and there was E and there was P, and now we're looking at D. But still, this whole idea of the fact is that it was pious fraud. I mean, it's a very profound accusation. So, but the evidence for a relatively recent writing of Deuteronomy is contained in the next 6 books of the Bible. And this is where we get some proof that there was this particular, whoever wrote or sections of Deuteronomy, maybe not the whole book, and maybe he didn't find the whole book. Maybe Hilkiah found the law codes, which are chapters 12 through 26 in the book of Deuteronomy. And they contain all these specific laws, what to do, what not to do. And what happens if you violate the law and everything like that. But the next 6 books, starting with Joshua, the Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and the 1st and 2nd Kings, we call this this division of the prophets, the early prophets. And basically, he says that these Deuteronomy or sections of Deuteronomy and these 6 books have very similar syntax, grammar, writing style, nuance, and it's not coincidental. So the person that Friedman and others believe wrote one person wrote all these books. And for now, we're going to call that person D, the Deuteronomist. Okay. In another biblical scholar, Martin Noth, who was from Germany in 1943, which is fairly recent in the span of history, demonstrated that a strong similarity existed among those books in Deuteronomy, and that a single writer editor had created the works. Okay, Noth refers to Deuteronomy in the 6 early prophet books that follow it as the Deuteronomistic history. And Friedman points out that the term testament is Latin for covenant. So what we're getting here is that and remember now that the book of the Chumash was filled with these covenants, these agreements between God and Abraham, God and Moses. And then in Samuel, we see King David and God, where God promises David that the line, that the throne will be Davidic forever. Okay. And so we see these different covenants as they take place, as they appear. But the 3rd covenant is the one that's the laws that are in Deuteronomy. So this is the section, chapters 12 through 26. So we have to question then, why did the author of Deuteronomy write this after the fall of Judah? The Davidic king Zedekiah or Zedekiah loses the throne and becomes a prisoner in Babylon. Okay. And when we look at this whole section here in chapter 5, there is one point here I wanted to point out to you. Okay. Because there's just so much material, I'm going to try to see if this makes some sense to you. I sent you also a copy of from the book, which was on page 109 in my copy. It's called Dut Jer. And Sam, if you could put that up, please, that'd be great. Okay. Okay, good. That's perfect. So what we look at here is this. This gives us an idea. Why am I putting this here? Because we're really saying that that we're looking at whoever this person is that was writing this Deuteronomist, this D, essentially really, he says it's Jeremiah. because his writing style is very similar to the writings of the book of Jeremiah, and clearly the last portion of Deuteronomy. So we take a look at here, we're just looking at these selections, these verses that were selected from Deuteronomy and Jeremiah. In Deuteronomy, would someone like to read? Let's see, Robert Lister, would you like to read out loud? Do you have it? And if you could unmute.
Okay. So to read the Deuteronomy?
You read Deuteronomy, and let's see, Jack Elder, how about if you read Jeremiah?
Okay.
Do
Okay.
you have it?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay.
All right.
Deuteronomy, and it will be if you really listen to Yahweh's voice.
All right, Jeremiah.
Oh, okay.
And it will be if you really listen to me, says Yahweh.
Okay, Deuteronomy, back and forth.
Okay. Circumcise the foreskin of your heart.
Be circumcised for Yahweh and take away the foreskins of your heart.
To all the host of the heavens.
To all the host of the heavens.
And he brought you out of the iron furnace from Egypt.
To the day I brought them out from the land of Egypt, from the iron furnace.
With all your heart and with all your soul.
With all my heart and with all my soul.
And that last one, if you really took it, if you just extend a little bit further, and I'll say it in the Hebrew. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha. Okay. All right. Small sample, but the language is so similar. As a matter of fact, it's more than similar. It's almost exact. Okay. Just worded slightly differently. Okay. So, and I think that this is really, this is important to look at this and to see how this really plays out. So, now Friedman, he talks about the fact that one of his professors, Frank Moore Cross, at Harvard University, he argued, he said, essentially he came out with the theory. Well, let me ask this. What did Frank Moore Cross come up with? He said that there was, that the Deuteronomist, what did he say about the Deuteronomist? What was his theory? Do you remember? Anybody? Well, I mean, he really came up and said that there were two authors.
Right,
A first author and a second author, Deuteronomy 1 and Deuteronomy 2, or Deuteronomist 1, Deuteronomist 2. He says that there is a Deuteronomist 1, which he calls DTR 1, really was writing at the time of King Josiah's court. Okay, well, he found the book. Okay, so that maybe makes some sense. But now why write? But after Judah was destroyed in 587, which was the destruction of the temple now, and the exile to Babylonia. So now he's writing about what had happened, but somehow in putting it into Deuteronomy, he said, if you don't follow the laws, this is what's going to happen. There'll be blessings and there'll be curses. Okay. And we see these, by the way, the we call them the tochachot, the blessings that we recite. They're so terrible that, and they show up twice. They show up in Deuteronomy, not as long as the one that's actually in at the end of at the book of Numbers. Okay, those are read when they are read in the synagogue on that particular Shabbat. They are read very quietly, almost to a whisper, and they're read so fast because they just want to gloss over these things. They are just terrible. Okay. So to give you a little bit of a sense of that. All right. So, so when Cross proposes that Deuteronomy were written by two people, He says, just why the second author did not edit out obvious contradictions, because there are contradictions. The rabbis have a wonderful way of explaining these things. Willie, you're good at this. You know how this stuff. Why? How are the rabbis generally explained contradictions away? No? Well, they come up with the same reason why they said that there was two creation stories. It's not two creation stories. It's just a kind of like a re-emphasis. It's a summarization of the first one. And so that's how they get around these things. All right. So Friedman mentions like an ironic twist, essentially. He said that a colleague of Cross's, G. Ernest Wright, he didn't accept the fact that there were two authors and two versions of Deuteronomy. He said that no covenant of God could ever be unconditional. He assigned one of his students to reach and defend that view, and that student happened to be Friedman, who then argued for Cross's view of Deuteronomy, which was kind of interesting. Friedman grew on with list. He listed 8 pieces of evidence in his book that basically and what he says is that, and then I can't go by the pages now again. Well, what he says, the number of things that he says. Okay, he says that number one, centralization of worship in the temple, protect the Levites who gain jurisdiction in legal matters. Not written by a king due to the fact that there was a restriction on the king's wealth, that the Levites were at Shiloh. The laws do not mention Jerusalem or the Ark, but rural Levites, they became disenfranchised and had to be supported by the people. There was prophets versus false prophets, laws dealing with charity, justice, family issues, and community, holidays, dietary laws, war, treatment of slaves in agriculture. So all of these things he brings up, and he says that they're, and I have in my book here, page 101, and you take a look at this, and essentially this was, these are all located in the chapters 12 through 26 in the book of Deuteronomy. Okay. So then, he goes back and he looks at, he says, let's look at Hezekiah and look at Josiah. Let's look at the language. Let's look at how it was written. And what he really found was 2 different types of writing altogether. Hezekiah was written at a time clearly before the destruction, even before Josiah, while the wording for Josiah is almost identical as that used to describe Moses. Okay. And he places the writing of Deuteronomy in Jerusalem, and the date of its writing was around 622 BC. And that's basically how he gets in 622. Remember, that is the year in which Hilkiah, the priest, found the book in the temple somewhere. Not even sure where. Okay. So then he comes up and he basically says, well, we have to identify the author of Deuteronomy. And he said, it's D, we said the Deuteronomist. And I already gave you an example of that and how that looked. Okay, so now we get into the whole idea of the contents of the law code. It gives us a clue as to the identity of the author. So like we said, the first law is to worship in a central place. The slaughter of animals had to be come from all over the land to the priests in the central place, where they would take 10% of the sacrifices. So a lot of these reforms were reinstituted under Josiah. And of course, he's trying to identify who this was. And another important part of the law was to protect the Levites, the things that I just said just before. Friedman, while referring to a paper that Baruch Halpern presented to the Harvard Near Eastern Department in 1974, and Halpern also was a great biblical scholar at the time, he eliminated the possibility that a king had written Deuteronomy because the law restricted how much wealth the king could possess, among other restrictions that a king would not likely impose upon himself. That made sense. The evidence also indicates that the author of Deuteronomy was a Levite from Shiloh. The laws do not mention Jerusalem or the ark. So if you were to read the text, you would see they would never mention anything like that. But they do put the rural Levites out of business in favor of those who are in central place of worship. However, the laws also call for everyone to support the disenfranchised Levites. So there was this recognition. This is, you can see how this stuff was kind of like put together. This really, the Levites got screwed on one hand, but on the other hand, we basically want to take care of them. Okay. Now, the prophet Jeremiah writes his book in much the same way that Deuteronomy had been written. And we kind of like, and I gave you an example of that because I thought that was really important. The language is so similar that Halpern gives credit to Jeremiah for writing Deuteronomy. And when if you were to spend the time to read it, you would know it. Not only that, but Jeremiah, the number of haftarahs that are found in the, during the course of the year is a plethora. I would say between Isaiah and Jeremiah, those are probably the two most, where most of the haftarot come from. All right. And it would be interesting, I think, if someone would want to take on that project, that, to see which Torah portions that Jeremiah is, the Haftarah quote taken from Jeremiah is inserted. Okay, and I think that's also something to look at, because then that might give us also some insight into how the rabbis looked at this. And again, we also said that he mentions the bronze snake of Moses, which none of the other prophets do. So the Jeremiah was really, he talked about that as well. There's a connection that existed between the author D and E. What was that connection? Both refer to the mountain where Moses received the 10 Commandments as Mount Horeb, not Sinai, but Horeb. Sinai, it's J and P refer to Sinai, and that would make sense, okay? Because J, in terms of Mount Sinai, this is where the 10 Commandments are received. This is where also at that particular time, where you remember the story, because Aaron, even though he placated the people and allowed them to build a golden calf, Aaron then turns around and says, kind of like, I was really like a victim. You were up there for 40 days and I'm stuck with all these crazy people. What am I supposed to do? And then he turns around and he said, okay, and then he goes ahead and he helps kill all of these people who built this idol. And so he's looked upon as a hero. And what we're really starting to see here is really the development. There were two groups of priests, essentially, even though they refer to it as like the Shilonite priests and the Aaronid priests. The Aaronid priests were the ones descendants of Aaron, and they were in Jerusalem. The Shilonite priests, they were the ones in Shiloh in the north and the northern kingdom. But some of the times they also refer to them as the Mushite priests, the followers of Moses. Moses and Aaron, there was always this tension. Yes, they were brothers, but don't we know about tension between brothers, between siblings? All right. In the Bible, we have it all the time. We have it in real life, unfortunately. Okay. And so this, again, expressions such as causes his name to dwell, place where Yahweh sets his name, and causes his name to be mentioned. They're common between D and E. A major difference between D and A and the authors J and P is the attitude towards Aaron, as I said. The priests of J and P regard themselves as descendants of Aaron and look upon him in a positive light. D and E descend from Moses and see Aaron in a negative sense. So, for example, some stories. Do you remember some of the stories earlier in the book? What about Miriam? When Miriam and Aaron come to Moses and they complain about his, how come they're not getting a bigger share of the pie, right? And God, what does God do? He punishes Miriam by go ahead, Rebecca, unmute.
He punishes her by making her a leper. Her skin is all white.
all white, not
like
just a
Snow
leopard,
White.
but all white, Snow White.
Oh,
Okay,
it was
all
a
right.
Cush that married the thing about the Cushite.
Exactly, because he married the, it says, we're not really clear. I mean, maybe they were never happy with, but Moses' wife, her name was Zipporah. All right. And she's not the bird lady. All right. Just Zipporah. All right. And, but Zipporah, we don't know much about her. We do know that she was the daughter of Yitro, who was a Midianite priest. But Yitro or Jethro is only one of two people, non-Israelites, non-Jews, that actually have a Torah portion named after them. Okay. And Yitro, the Torah portion Yitro, is contained the 10 Commandments, the giving of the 10 Commandments, which is central. So, just keep that in mind a little bit. And again, so this whole idea of the fact, and also the D&E, the Shilonite priests, and associates with them with the scribes. So we have this whole idea of the fact that the Aaronid family and the Shilonites or the Mushites. Now, the identification of biblical insertions, well, that depends upon two or more of the following clues being present: the wording, the grammar, the syntax, the theme, and the literary structure. Freeman draws the Deuteronomistic history from these identified insertions that serve to glue several books together into comprehensive stories. So what he's saying is the following: that these stories existed, these two versions existed, and he decided, in order to, kind of like, literally, like he says, like the glue, or just basically to make everything seamless, to make this history seamless, and to keep Sholem Bayit, essentially. That's what he's trying to do in a sense, okay? And that was, so he would use these certain phrases or little stories and just bring them together. And guess what? When we read them, we don't think much about them. I mean, honestly, how many of you, just by raising your hands, how many of you before you took this course or you read other, when you were younger, in our youth, how many of you really thought that there was just two creation stories? We all thought it was one creation story. We just thought, you're right, chapter 1. And so, all right, so it's kind of like a little bit of different order and everything. So they're just saying, the rabbi said, they spin it as saying it's a review and kind of like a little bit of a regurgitation. We didn't see that there were two flood stories. Didn't seem that way. So we see that and we just accept. Now we take it and we break it down and we say, my goodness, look at this. Okay. So now we basically said the books of Joshua and Judges and 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, they contain all of these different insertions, so that what happens now, all of a sudden, if the story becomes seamless. The common theme involves God giving direction, that humans disobey and they're punished, and then they repent. And after that, God grants forgiveness. And it's a common theme. It plays out over and over and over again. And probably one that, you wouldn't think of, but I'm using this now because of the story of Samson. Samson and Delilah, all right, Shimshon. And Samson, his situation was slightly different because, I'm having a senior moment. Help me out. He specifically had where he could not eat wine. He couldn't drink wine. He couldn't cut his hair. And so, Susan, anybody do? Someone's raising their hand.
Was
Yes,
it
yes.
Nazareth?
That's right.
Nazareth. Thank you very much.
That's right.
Thank you.
That's right.
Thank you. Got it. Okay. And so, but he was very powerful. He was very handsome. And so he got, he fell under the spell of Delilah, and he begins, and essentially, and he was supposed to be the hero. This is during the period of the Judges, and he's supposed to be a hero and to protect him from the Philistines. And ultimately what happens to him? Because he gets seduced and he shows, and he violates all the laws of the Nazarite. So what happens? He gets captured by the Philistines. They torture him and everything else. They cut his hair, they blind him. And then he realizes what? What does he do? He repents. And he just pours out his heart and everything like that. And ultimately God rewards him by doing what? Giving him his strength back. And that he literally, then he spreads his arms and he knocks down the pillars of the Philistinian temple and destroys everything. Okay. And that's just one example of that whole idea of repenting. But we have it. The whole mechanism of Yom Kippur, of atoning for one's sins. Look at the legal formula that we have for Kol Nidre. And that's a legal document. Actually, it is a legal document. And that's why Kol Nidre has to be said before dark, in the daylight, when business would be conducted, when legal business would be conducted. Okay. And why do we recite it 3 times? Because a contract was read, a legal document was read 3 times in order for it to become binding. And by the way, we have this tradition today in the United States, in our state legislatures and in our Congress. Do you know that? They have the first reading, the second reading, and the third reading of the law before it actually becomes law and passed on to the governor. All right, voted by the legislatures and then passed on to the governors. So, I mean, we don't realize this, but it's just these little things. I like to throw them in. All right. Okay, we're going to move on. So the other themes that were also emphasized: loyalty to Yahweh, the nature of the Davidic covenant, and the centralization of the religion and Torah. I got to check the time. Oh, all right. Well, I almost made it. So it's 9:30. Yes, Rebecca?
Is it possible for you to give us the assignment for next time at an earlier time?
Well, I did. I gave you this. You have the
I have the
syllabus?
The syllabus, I do.
The syllabus. So that's like next time is going to be chapters 8 through 11.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. So we didn't really finish chapter 7. So I'll start with chapter 7 next week. I'll do a brief thing of chapter 7 next week. And we'll do chapters 8 through 11. Did I go too fast?
No.
All right.
No.
And I didn't see really too many questions. So I guess that was okay. All right, then. So, wow, that really flew by. Any other questions at all before we leave? I'll be certainly.
Is there a class next week?
No, the next class is going to be
Yeah.
the 8th of December and then the 15th of December. So you have a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, I think, right?
Right.
The 3 weeks? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks.
You're
Steve.
welcome, everybody. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Sam. Everything worked
Thank
out
you.
well. All
Thank
right.
you, Samantha.
Take care. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, everybody. Enjoy your
Thank you.
holiday.
Good job, Steve.
Thank you.